The rusted pickup truck groaned as Elias navigated the winding, fog-choked roads of the Pacific Northwest. Huge, ancient Douglas firs towered over the path like silent sentinels, blocking out the dying embers of the Oregon sun. He was headed to the Blackwood cabin, a skeletal structure of rotting wood and shattered memories where his brother, Leo, had spent his final, frantic days. The air here felt heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, as if the very atmosphere was charged with an unspoken warning. Elias wasn't here for closure. He was here for the tapes, the raw audio recordings that supposedly drove his brother to the brink of madness. The interior of the cabin smelled of cedar and stagnant time. Dust motes danced in the pale beam of Elias's flashlight, revealing a workspace frozen in chaos. Wires coiled across the floor like hibernating snakes, and high-end reel-to-reel recorders sat like altars on the heavy oak desk. As a sound engineer, Elias felt a cold comfort in the gear, but the silence of the cabin was unnatural. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a pressurized void that seemed to press against his eardrums. He set up his monitors, his heart hammering a rhythmic beat against his ribs, a frantic percussion in the hollow theater of the woods. Midnight arrived with a sudden drop in temperature that turned Elias's breath into ghostly plumes. He pulled his professional-grade headphones over his ears, seeking refuge in the white noise of a blank frequency. But then, it emerged, a faint, rhythmic whistling, thin and reedy, threading through the static. His blood turned to ice. It was the specific, off-key melody Leo used to whistle when he was nervous. Elias adjusted the gain, his fingers trembling. The sound wasn't coming from the tape. It felt like it was originating from the very air molecules inside his headphones, vibrating directly against his brain. The psychological weight of the cabin began to warp Elias's perception. In the dim light of the flickering lamps, the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and liquefy, moving just outside his field of vision. He began to question if the grief was finally fracturing his mind. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a whispered syllable, and every gust of wind against the glass sounded like a desperate plea for help. The boundary between the external world and his internal trauma was dissolving, leaving him stranded in a gray zone where logic had no currency. Under a pile of discarded technical manuals, Elias found Leo's handwritten journal. The entries were a descent into a specialized kind of hell. Leo didn't write about ghosts. He wrote about acoustic shadows, pockets of space where time and sound folded in on themselves. The handwriting evolved from neat script to jagged, frantic scratches. One underlined sentence sent a jolt of pure electricity through Elias's spine. The forest doesn't mimic you, it harvests you. He realized then that the whistling hadn't been a memory, it was a lure. Elias decided to record the room's ambient sound to analyze the frequency. When he played it back, the audio was a distorted nightmare. He heard his own voice on the recording, but it was sobbing, a deep, guttural racking of the chest. Yet he knew he hadn't made a sound. The timeline of the audio was out of sync with reality. He watched the digital waveform on his laptop screen transform into sharp, jagged teeth, biting through the silence. The cabin was no longer shelter. It was a recording device, and he was the input. Driven by a sudden surge of adrenaline and dread, Elias looked toward the window. The glass acted as a dark mirror against the night. For a split second, he didn't see his own reflection. He saw Leo standing directly behind him, his face gaunt and his eyes replaced by two hollow, black voids. Elias spun around, knocking over his chair, but the room was empty. The emotional toll of seeing his brother's distorted image shattered his remaining resolve, leaving him gasping for air in the suffocating stillness. The paranoia became a physical weight. Elias pressed his ear against the wooden wall, and to his horror, he heard a heartbeat. Not his own, but a slow, tectonic thumping that seemed to vibrate from the very foundation of the Blackwood cabin. Thump, thump, thump. It was as if the house itself was a living, breathing organism, and the rhythmic pulse was synchronizing with his own heart. He tried to count his pulse, but the house's rhythm was infectious, forcing his body to obey its unnatural tempo. A hidden latch in the floorboards revealed a crawl space filled with old magnetic tape, discarded like shed skin. In the center sat Leo's final recorder, its battery light blinking a weak, dying red. Elias pressed play. Leo's voice was a ragged whisper. "If you're hearing this, Elias, it's already caught your frequency. It knows how you sound when you're afraid. Don't trust your ears. It uses our love against us." A cold hand seemed to tighten around Elias's throat as he realized the Leo he thought he saw was just a frequency being played back to him. The air in the room grew static charged, making the hair on Elias's arms stand up. A shadow detached itself from the wall. Not a ghost, but a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat rising from asphalt. It began to speak, using a perfect synthesis of Elias's own voice and Leo's. It spoke of childhood secrets, of hidden shames, and of the crushing weight of the grief Elias had carried since the funeral. It was a psychological assault, using his own memories as weapons to break his spirit. Panic took over. Elias bolted for the front door, throwing it open to the freezing night air. He ran into the darkness, but after 20 paces, he found himself stepping through the back door of the kitchen, right back into the cabin. He tried the window. It led back to the hallway. Space had become a closed loop, a sonic track on repeat. No matter how hard he ran, the architecture of the cabin redefined itself to keep him trapped within its wooden ribs. He walked back into the main room and froze. Sitting at his desk, wearing his headphones, was another Elias. This version of him looked older, his skin sallow and his eyes wide with an expression of eternal shock. The double didn't look up. It just stared at the monitor, watching the waveforms of the Elias standing in the doorway. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was witnessing a previous take of himself, a recording of his own soul trapped in the cabin's memory. Suddenly, every speaker in the room detonated with a wall of white noise, so loud it felt like a physical explosion. Elias fell to his knees, clutching his head as blood began to trickle from his ears. The sound was a composite of every scream, every laugh, and every whisper ever uttered within these walls. It was the Blackwood frequency, a psychological overload designed to erase the individual and replace them with a hollow echo. His vision blurred into a sea of static. The noise stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that followed was sweet, seductive, and terrifying. Elias felt a strange sense of peace wash over him, a total surrender of his identity. He climbed into the chair, gently nudging his double aside, who evaporated into a cloud of gray dust. He put on the headphones. He finally understood. He wasn't Elias anymore. He was just another layer of audio, a permanent resident of the frequency. He leaned into the microphone and whispered, "Welcome home." 3 days later, local authorities found the truck abandoned, the engine frozen. Inside the cabin, they found no sign of Elias. The equipment was powered on, the reels spinning in a slow, hypnotic circle. A young deputy picked up the headphones and listened for a moment. He turned pale and quickly set them down. When his partner asked what he heard, the deputy couldn't find the words. On the tape, there was no voice, only the sound of two brothers whistling a perfectly harmonious tune, fading into a silence that felt far too hungry.